Hi, it's Ken Ham, President of Answers Genesis Creation Museum and the Ark Encounter, and we're here on a beautiful winter's day, warm inside, at the Answers and Genesis offices here in January 2017. Have a couple of special guests today. This is sort of going to be an interesting teaching Facebook Live video. Fascinating material, information that many people are unaware of, cutting-edge creationist research. I have with me Dr. Nathaniel Jeanson and Bodhi Hodge. Many of you will know Bodhi's name. He's one of our speakers. Happens to be my son-in-law. Came here when he wasn't interested in our daughter, and then, well, things happened. That was a number of years ago, and father of 4 of our grandchildren. But Bodhi also, you see his name on a number of the books as well. He just came out with the World Religions number 3. Bodhi Hodge and Roger Patterson, who put that together, and that one specifically deals with humanism and atheism.
That's right. A lot of the atheistic secular religions, agnosticism, secularism, humanism, dualism, just a lot of things like that.
And we really want people to understand atheism is a religion. They try to make out they're not a religion, and
That's right.
and they are. They have beliefs. They have blind faith beliefs that everything happened by natural processes.
You know, it's interesting. One of the things that I keep hearing from atheists, some of these humanists, is, well, we're not religious. But an easy way to check that is say, well, why are you opposing religious claims? If you're not religious, you shouldn't have a dog in that fight. So the sheer fact that they want to argue against religious claims shows that they are religious.
Well, that's not the main purpose of what we're here today for. You've also got a book called The Tower of Babel, and I'm going to drag you in here in a bit because we're going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about Noah's daughter-in-laws. Is that right?
Yep.
Dr. Jeanson. So let me just tell you a bit about Dr. Jeanson first of all, because we have a number of scientists here at Answers and Genesis, and of course the secular world try to make out that we don't have real scientists here. So I thought I'd introduce you to one of our real scientists here, and some of the cutting and in the flesh, and some of the cutting edge research that Nathaniel has done. So first of all, you have a PhD in cell and developmental biology. I can't even say it. PhD in cell and developmental biology from Harvard Graduate School. You're a graduate of Harvard?
And people often think either I was lying to get through or paid to get through, and they never consider the third option, which was no, I actually learned science, and then I took what I learned and applied it to the origins issue.
So when people say you can't be a scientist, a real scientist, if you're a creationist, you got a PhD from Harvard University, and they said you've done the work to be a scientist, right?
There's a lot of people who don't want creationists to be scientists, but the real science really has very little to do with origins. So I was doing observational empirical research on how do adult stem cells function, and can we manipulate them for medical purposes.
Well, and Dr. Jeanson, I know you wouldn't, in a sense, want me to read out all this, but I do want to read this out simply because I want people to understand that you have excelled in what you have been involved in. Summa cum laude, I think that's right way pronouncing it, University of Wisconsin, Parkside, 2003, National Science Foundation Research Experience for Undergraduates in Molecular Biology and Bioinformatics recipient, 2002. American Society of Plant Physiologists, now the American Society of Plant Biologists, Undergraduate Research Fellowship recipient, 2001. University of Wisconsin Parkside Collaborative Undergraduate Research Project recipient, 2001. Abbott Laboratories Foundation Undergraduate Research Fellow in Molecular Biology, 2000 to 2001. Dean's List, University of Wisconsin Parkside, 1999 to 2003. And Molecular Biology Scholars Program member, University of Wisconsin Parkside, 1999 to 2003. So you have quite a number of honours and awards, and I wanted people to understand that. And we have a number of other scientists here at the ministry as well who've also received awards published in the secular world. They claim out there in the world that, oh, you guys never publish, and you've published quite a number of things, haven't you?
Number of first author, well, one first author publication, then co-author publications from graduate school, and have been publishing the research I've been doing here as well in our peer-reviewed journal.
So what we want to talk about today, let's have a look at this diagram here. Then I want you to explain this to us and the research that you've been involved in, because people there might not understand this, but when I'm looking at these 3 sections that are highlighted here, we could be looking at Noah's daughter-in-laws. So
Yes.
can you explain the research, what you've been involved in here? Because, and this relates to the fact that I brought Bodhi into this discussion as well because of his book, The Tower of Babel, where he shows in there or the names in different cultures that can be traced back to Ham, Shem, and Japheth, the three sons of Noah. And I'll talk to Bodhi about that in a moment. But first of all, can you explain what you're doing from a perspective of genetics and what this means for creationist research?
So let's step back for a minute. I've had people walk by and say, so is this galaxies you're displaying? And in fact, it's DNA differences. So how do we get from people to this? And so what you might do is you might go around the world, get a cheek swab or a blood sample from someone in Namibia, someone in Germany, someone in Spain, someone in India. You send that off to the lab, you get their genetic sequence basically. It's kind of like an alphabet, 4 letters in it, DNA alphabet. And then you can compare letter by letter these genetic sequences from these individual people around the globe. And if you zoom in, you can see each of these lines ends in a name. This tells you the geography, the Dominican Republic. Bamileke is an African group, more Dominican Republic. This branch in particular has a number of African individuals in it. Up here you have other groups around the world. Here's someone from Ethiopia, North Africa. You have Mediterranean people groups here, Egypt, Mauritania, Iraq, and I think you have some southern Europe. Yeah, Italy right here. You have some Indians over here, Southeast Asians, Aborigines, Chinese, all over the globe. So this is several hundred individuals represented here again.
So you've collated all this information.
It's publicly available. There's about 42,000 of these types of sequences in our public databases, and so I'm interested in those from indigenous people groups, basically, not necessarily those that have migrated. We know, obviously, sadly, through the slave trade or just European migrations in the last few hundred years. I'm looking at those who've been in their places for a long time, as far as we know. So, and this DNA sequence in particular is just a small subset. Why would we look at only a small subset? Because it's a really useful tool, and it's something that the evolutionists have been studying for a long time as well. This is mitochondrial DNA. It's in both males and females, but it comes strictly through the maternal line. So I have my mother's mitochondrial sequence.
Okay.
My children have my wife's.
Okay. And so you've been studying mitochondrial DNA in all these different cultures around the world. And what would evolutionists, first of all, predict in regard to that?
So if you look at this, we can see, first of all, they don't all form just one group. They're not all the same sequence. These lines basically represent the number of DNA differences. So if there's to figure out how many DNA differences between any two people, you might look at this person right here from Mauritania, and you just follow that line down to connect it to someone else. So if there's a short amount of difference from here to here, that means there's few DNA differences. To go from Mauritania to someone, let's say, in Japan, you'd have to follow that line, there's my person, down here, connect them all the way through, over, up this way, and you can see there's more DNA differences between that individual and this Japanese individual. So, first of all, there's differences, and that represents a history. And so the evolutionists try to read evolutionary history off this. They say all of this takes hundreds of thousands of years. They'd say modern humans evolved in Africa about 200,000 years ago. You can see this whole branch right here is pretty long. They'd say the reason, and it's primarily Africans, they'd say the reason it's so long is because Africans have been around longer than the rest of the world, that humans evolved first in Africa. So they say that, and this is true, they could say that there's differences, that mutations that occur each generation. The sequence changes on average. We know now about every 6 generations. So you go back a few generations and your great, however many grandmothers ago, and you'll find a DNA difference. And so they say these accumulate with time. The longer someone's been around, the more DNA differences. So Africans have more DNA differences. They've been around a long time. And this
So
whole
those
thing,
differences mutations or? Okay.
Yep. That we would both agree, creationist evolutionists, that there was an original woman. They would say she was part of a population, but they'd say the maternal ancestry of the modern human race goes back to one individual. They'd say that she lived in Africa 200,000 years ago, and so they'd work it into their overall millions of years timescale.
So what are you saying? What's your interpretation?
What's interesting is, for many years, they based that timescale not on actual direct measurements. So if we think of, let's say, a geology example, someone might say, well, how fast is the Colorado River eroding the Grand Canyon? Instead of actually going down there and measuring that, they'd say, well, let's first calculate the ages of the layers and how deep the canyon is, and we'll just sort of assume and infer a rate instead of directly measuring it. So that's kind of what they did in genetics. Now we've finally gone in and said, well, let's get the sequence from mom and sequence from daughter and then sequence from granddaughter and see how fast it changes. That rate leads you to these numbers over here, which are very different from the evolutionary expectations.
Okay, so we'll have a look at this chart over here.
So again, on average, about once every 6 generations, with some variety, there's a mistake that happens. So on this chart over here, on average, in those African branches, there's about 80 differences. In the non-Africans, there's on average of 40 differences. The most different individual we can find in all those thousands of sequences is about 123. Again, averages are lower. This is just to say what's the biggest difference you can find on Earth so far? About 123. Well, if you do one mutation every 6 generations, and there's about maybe 400 generations since creation or so, you can easily explain this. Now, what's one mutation every 6 generations in 200,000 years? Way more than what you see. So the evolutionists have a real problem now.
So this is where the evolutionary prediction doesn't match with real observational science.
Correct.
But observational science does confirm what the creationists would predict.
And this result is significant for a number of reasons. One is there's an obvious mismatch. 2, there's a clear match between what the young Earth model says and what we actually see. 3rd, this has been done then in about 3 or 4 other species in animals. And the same scenario holds true. Way too many mutations that evolution predicts, exactly the same number, the correct number that creation predicts. And so this then tells me I can probably predict the mutation rate in other species. Now, why is this significant? You think back maybe 50 years, the evolutionists have criticized us saying you're anti-science, you don't make any testable prediction, you just say God did it. No, we've come a long way, and I'm taking the challenge to them now and saying, hey, let's go out and there's a fox in the woods. I bet you I can tell you how fast his mutation rate is. And I'm hard-pressed to see that they can. Now, let's think about this. What are mutations? Mutations are the central driving mechanism of evolution. And so if there's anything on this Earth that the evolutionists should be able to predict and get right, this should be it.
And they can't.
And it's the young Earth creationists who are
young Earth creationists
the
are
numbers
predicting
better than they are.
So this actually supports the fact that the human population hasn't been around that long.
The human population looks young. There's too few genetic differences for us to have a very, very long history.
Now, the other aspect of this here is those 3 areas you've highlighted there.
Yes. You can sort of see it visually. Now there's some clusters that group. What I want to point out here, and I've highlighted in yellow, is the fact that all of these lines tend to come back to a common origin, and basically 3 different common clusters. Again, visually you can kind of see it. You can see some subclusters. Subclusters will always pop out depending on who you've sampled and how many people you've sampled. This really, though, is not a point of dispute because the evolutionists themselves recognize this. The technical term is haplogroups, and they say, yes, there's an L, M, and M haplogroup. This is standard evolutionary science. No one would dispute the fact that there's 3 major groupings. Now, you think about this from a biblical perspective. What is the maternal ancestry of the human population? Well, it starts with Adam and Eve. They have many children. You zoom fast forward to the time of the flood. How many female lineages survive the flood? Well, there's Noah and his wife.
Right.
Mrs. Noah passes on mitochondrial DNA to the sons, but
right.
It stops there
Right.
because the boys don't pass on. And so their wives would have passed on. So all of us would really trace back to 3 women. And so it's remarkable that you see these 3 groups. What's even more remarkable, and I think consistent with identifying these as the wives of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, is the relative pattern. Again, we're saying that DNA differences are a marker of time. They're a marker of thousands of years, not hundreds of thousands of years. So how many generations were pre-flood? I'm saying this is basically the time of the flood. How many were pre-flood? How many post-flood? Well, on the paternal side, we know from Genesis 5, Adam to Noah and his sons, about 10 generations, even though it's about 1,600 years,
Right.
long lifespans. Right. And then, of course, post-flood, those lifespans drop off pretty fast, and so you've probably got a couple hundred generations post-flood. So very little time for mutation pre-flood. That's what I'm saying here. These are probably not sisters, but perhaps a little bit more distant relatives. So you have a very short branch, short time connecting them, and then longer branches post-flood. So that both the fact that there's 3...
Because there's more generation time is shorter,
yes.
and more mutations.
And thinking
increased
about
mutation rate.
And thinking about the mutations is what probably also explains this long African branch. Actually, there's two potential explanations. They could undergo a little bit faster rate of change. That has a hypothesis yet to be tested because no one's actually measured the rate of change in Africans. A second explanation is some data that I've looked at and published up here. When you measure the rate of change, you're measuring mother, daughter, grandmother, granddaughter. You're measuring the units of time or generations. You have to convert that to an absolute time scale of years. And the way you do that is you know how old the mothers were when they gave birth. And here's something interesting, data from the 70s, looking at women in African nations, non-African nations. On average, this is from the 70s, about a third of African women were married by ages 15 and 19. They married early, whereas the rest of the globe, only about 10%. That's about a 2 to 3-fold difference. What if that was true historically? That means Africans, and this mitochondrial DNA measures maternal ancestry, Africans would have gone through twice as many, 3 times as many generations, have gone through twice as many, 3 times as many mutations.
Which is what you see.
And that's about, like I said earlier, and that's again published data from the evolutionists, about 80 differences in Africans, 40 differences in non-Africans, about a 2-fold difference.
So Dr. Jeanson, creationists and evolutionists all have the same data. And here it is here. And evolutionists would say, yes, there are these 3 groupings in regard to mitochondrial DNA that all this goes back to. But if you use the actual measured mutation rate, as you've done, real observational science, it goes against the evolutionary time frame, and it actually all fits with the biblical time frame, and actually fits with the biblical history of the 3 daughters-in-law of Noah after the flood, giving rise to all the people that we see on Earth today.
And we could ask, well, what do the evolutionists do with this? By and large, they tend to ignore everything we publish, but there's been a few who've tried to question it, and most of them mock, but the few who've tried to actually take this seriously have tried to attack the mutation rate.
Right.
And one of the blog articles I read said, well, this is 35 times too fast. You're disagreeing with the published mutation rate. Well, you go and look up the paper and what's the published mutation rate? That evolutionary circular reasoning where you don't actually measure the rate. You say, well,
just
we know
assume
that,
a rate.
Yeah, we know that humans split from chimpanzees about 7 million years ago. Of course, now they're saying 13 million years ago. That changes too. And we know how many differences there are. Therefore, the rate must be this.
So in actual fact, it's creationists who are using observational science when it comes to the mutation rate. The evolutionists are not. They're using, it's really a guess. It's really their story.
And I've published about 3 papers on this specific question and tried to incorporate the 15 or so papers that have been published, and all along the way it's been giving a consistent answer.
I'm going to get you to answer some questions here in a moment. People might want to think through the questions, but I'll ask Bodhi to come in now, because from a different perspective than just genetics, Bodhi, you've written a book called The Tower of Babel, and what have you found in regard to confirming biblical history?
Well, I think what he's looking at here is actually just matching up beautifully with what we find starting with the biblical record, and then as we go through the historical record. One of the things we do in here is we're tracing the sons, the grandsons, the great-grandsons, and so we're following more a paternal line as opposed to the female line. And so what we do historically is a lot of commentators, a lot of historians, they've commented on this stuff. Of course, the Bible talks further about some of these different peoples as well. Just to give you an example, the Greeks are the descendants of Javan, one of Noah's grandsons. If you look at Mitzrayim, that's actually Egypt every time you see it in the Old Testament. And so, I mean, we actually trace this. Mitzrayim was one of Noah's grandsons. We can trace a number of these people groups, not only from a biblical perspective, but a lot of historians. Josephus, for example, was a historian, a Jewish historian, actually about 2,000 years ago or so. And he actually gave us a beautiful stepping stone. He started pointing out some of these different peoples, some of these different sons in Genesis chapter 10. And he said who they were in his day and age, or at least what the Greeks would have called them, and things like that. So we can actually trace a lot of these different people groups. And I think it's powerful because what we see historically is a great confirmation of what we read in the Bible, and yet we're looking here genetically, and that's a great confirmation as well.
So you're looking at it from the perspective of the names that we see in cultures traced from the paternal lines of Noah's 3 sons and then the grandsons so on, and great-grandsons. And Dr. Jeanson has been looking at the maternal line through the mothers, the 3 mothers, the 3 daughters-in-law of Noah, the wives of Ham, Shem, and Japheth, and showing genetically that observational science confirms the Bible's history. So on those two fronts, you put that together, it's just overwhelming evidence that what the Bible's teaching us, that we all go back to the three sons of Noah, then back to Noah, and then back to Adam. I mean, it's just overwhelming. Wouldn't you say, Dr. Jeanson?
And one of the things that Bodhi alluded to in his book, The Tower of Babel, the next step in this research would be, well, you've got Eve, he goes back to one person, even creationists, evolutionists agree on that. We've got data on the time scale, we've got echo of the flood right here. Well, what's next in the biblical narrative? Babel. You know, Genesis, so you have Genesis 1, Eve, Genesis 6 to 9.
Babel or Babel?
I don't know. Probably depends where you're from. And then Genesis 11 now. Do we have a signature of Babel? I think in one sense we do. You can see, I've got probably several hundred individuals here, all sorts of ethnic groups around the world. Again, Africa, Europe, Asia, Australia, the Aborigines, Southeast Asia, Papua New Guineans, Native Americans, and so forth. A lot of them spray out very quickly from these nodes. It's not like there's this staggered and slowly over time. It's boom, they start spraying out from each other. Now, what should be the signature of Babel? This is something I've learned as I've been researching this question. You think about the listing of the 70 or so people in Genesis 10. Well, then you go forward in biblical history of Abraham, but Abraham goes down to Egypt and then comes out of Egypt, and then Israel conquers the promised land. They conquer peoples. They get conquered by other peoples. So after Babel, even from a biblical perspective, there's this long history of conquest, pillage, migration, and I think we're beginning to see this. There's a real messiness to this, intermixing of people groups, but if this is true, as we're saying, this is a 6,000-year history. You've got pre-flood right here. You've got post-flood right here. We should be able to, in theory, go onto this chart and read off extra biblical events. So one thing that's been sort of tantalizing to me, if this, let's use this little branch here as an example. If we're saying this year is about the time of the flood, then Babel happens. This sprays off pretty quickly. This represents about from tip here to down here, about 4,500 years of history. About roughly halfway up, so 4,500 divided by 2 is 2,000-ish years ago, there's these individuals, lineages that spray off. Well, these happen to be Mediterranean. You've got North Africa, like Morocco. You've got Middle East, like Iraq. You've got Southern Europe, Southern Italy. Well, what's going on in the Mediterranean about 2,000 years ago, the Roman Empire? So it's this sort of thing that I think would really send shockwaves through the scientific community if I can say, look, here's an event none of you deny, none of you can deny, and here's the echo of it. Here's another historical event. None of you can deny. You all agree on it. Boom, it's right here, just as you'd expect from a young Earth time scale. So this is really where we're trying to take the research next, and I think we've got some really interesting leads that could confirm that.
This is phenomenal. How about we go into your office, and we'll get Bodhi in with us as well. And if people want to ask questions, we'll get them to do that, and we'll have our videographer Maria just read out the questions as we go along here. And first of all, if people want to find out more about this, do you have it published anywhere, or do you have anything published?
Yes, there's a number of publications for students who are low on funds, like I was for many years.
Okay.
We've got articles. So for the technically minded, I've got about 3 published papers. You just go to our website, answersingenesis.org. You type in my name, and it'll list my publications. Which is a lot of technical detail.
Nathaniel Jeanson, or just type in Jeanson.
Yeah.
Should work. Are they on the main website or on our Answers Research Journal website?
Even if you go to the search engine on our main website, it'll pull
them up in the Answers Research Journal. Okay.
We've got a book that just came out, Searching for Adam, multi-authored work. Terry Mortensen has been the editor. He was the editor of Coming to Grips with Genesis, a similar type work for the pastor. So this is not for my scientific peers who are nerds, but for someone who says, well, I'm going to preach this on Sunday, what do I do?
Yeah,
and I've heard this has come up. I've just heard that genetics disproves Adam and Eve. What do I do? Well, we've got a whole chapter that I've co-authored with Jeff Tompkins from the Institute for Creation Research. He's done a lot of work on the human-chimpanzee genetic similarity question. A whole chapter on that, discussing the data we just showed here, discussing the fact that you can explain all these differences in 6,000 years, that there's these 3 groups, basically, that fit the daughters of Noah, that Africans seem to marry earlier. All these sorts of things you can find in this
really,
book as
even
well.
a pastor preaching in church can say, look, I don't understand all the technical details, but Dr. Nathaniel Jeanson, he's a PhD scientist, graduate of Harvard. He's done all this research, and what he's shown is genetically you can trace all the people in the world today back to 3 groups that he's saying represent the the three wives of Ham, Shem, Japheth, and so on, and they can just give people that big picture and refer them to the articles.
Yes, yes. And what I also like about this book, I learned from this book and these types of works. I mean, every scientist is a layperson outside his field, so Dave Menton's chapter on human origins, anatomy and physiology, and fossils is fantastic. You've got the biblical. I'm no Hebrew scholar, so
right. And then there's the Tower of Babel book that
Mm-hmm.
traces the names back to the actual names of the grandsons of Noah and so on, and fascinating. And all this together is just so powerful. It really is.
One of the questions that we saw pop up was how many people were there at the Tower of Babel? And, we've done some listings of that. You have Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And then you also have Peleg, who was probably fairly young when, the earth was divided, which is in the context of the people groups being split apart there at Babel. And if you tally that up, you get at least 78 different language families that came out at the Tower of Babel, splitting apart the gene pool. Now, I say at least 78 because there's a few in there where there's other sons and daughters. Now, if that's the case, there may be a few others, but that's at least what we have as the listing of the sons at that particular time. Now, we presume if they have families, they've got wives, they've got kids, so you have at least that many wives, there may be a few others, and that might actually work very well into some of the research that you've got there. I don't know if you've looked at this, when you get to that second wave of breakdown, have you looked at, maybe numbers on some of that at all, or what do you think there?
Yeah, and I had a pastor ask me that recently, saying, how does this Babel thing work? And there are two issues that I think that many people don't realize. One is the explosive power of exponential math, basically. Population growth is exponential. You see just even the listing of the names, all sorts of kids each generation. I forget what the percentage growth is, like 400%, someone has calculated. But even in theory, you can get 1,000 people just like that, using today's numbers on lifespan and reproductive age and so forth. So you can get people fast. And the other thing people don't realize is there's I think his major hurdle was, well, there's 7,000 plus languages in the world today. How do you get that from 70 people? Languages change quickly. It's something we don't realize as much today because, like in the United States, TV homogenizes our culture. But when you're isolated, you get languages changes naturally, basically,
well, that's right.
and divides.
We've got at least 3 accents.
So, and of course, there were certain basic groups. And isn't it even true with languages that they can trace them back to certain basic groups that they can't go beyond?
That's right. Those are called language families, and different researchers work on this. Vista Wide World Languages, is just one example. But what they do is they actually compare different languages. Like English. Australian, Canadian, obviously we're all part of the English language family, but English is actually considered a subset of Germanic languages. So is Norwegian and Austrian. So those are one language family. And what a lot of these researchers say is the numbers kind of vary every year, but they tend to sit around 90 to 100 language families kind of as a maximum. Now you have to watch some of those numbers because nowadays we have some new language, constructed languages. Esperanto is one of those. Klingon, believe it or not, is a language now. Some of these guys throw it in there. Sometimes they throw in computer languages. But when it comes to actual languages, if we have a maximum of, say, 90 to 100 and a minimum of 78 that left the Tower of Babel, we're right in the ballpark. That's a great confirmation of the Bible, I think.
So, Maria, I know there's been questions about where they can read this. We've sort of answered that. On our Answers in Genesis website, type in Jeanson, Dr. Jeanson, Dr. Nathaniel Jeanson on our website comes up with some of the articles. And the Tower of Babel stuff, Bodhi's written articles too, Bodhi Hodge, on the Tower of Babel, and you've got the books here that we mentioned. So other questions?
Where can people find this video after Facebook? Will it be on YouTube?
This video here, well, it'll be on my Facebook, and we will also have it archived in our Answers in Genesis YouTube channel. So I'll make sure it'll be on the Answers in Genesis YouTube channel, and we'll archive it there. But because this is fascinating, cutting-edge research.
I had to tell you one more thing, if I may, unless you had another question.
Go ahead.
But this language is really the motivation. I started about maybe about a year ago. I found a linguist with Wycliffe. I said, hey, Babel is basically a linguistic event. It will have genetic consequences, but the cause is God confusing the languages. And really it was trying to, so I said, can we synthesize linguistics and genetics to create a comprehensive map of humanity? And really what arose out of this was the third explanation we already discussed, conquest and migration. And so here I have just printed off from the internet some of the language families to which Bodhi was referring. The Afro-Asiatic, when I saw this is what it really began to click for me. You've got a map here. Unfortunately, the colors are a little bit changed, but in blue here is Afro-Asiatic, and it extends to the Middle East, of course. I said, that looks like the Islamic Empire. You've got another language family up here. The colors are a little bit split, gray and green here, but Genghis Khan's empire. I'm like, wait a minute. This is events I learned in high school that seem to be reflected in this map of humanity that, this is what the secularists are putting out. And again, the same thing holds true here in genetics. There's a little difference, of course, we learned. Take the African Americans as an example. You can change your language. You come from Africa and you learn English, but you can't change your genetics. The African Americans are still on the African branch of the family tree because that's where they came from. So in both cases we're seeing now, and this is an active research project, linguistics, genetics, these look like they're records of post-Babel extra-biblical history that the secularists, of course, cannot dispute. So this is, I think, going to be is becoming and will become a real challenge for that millions of years time scale when, in fact, everything we've seen the last few thousand years is sufficient, and it leaves an echo, a signature, a stamp in these two fields that no one can dispute.
And you're also working with scientists, creation scientists, who are dealing with the issue of supposed similarities between humans and chimpanzees, that they're so close and so on. Just summarize what they found there.
Yes, and what's interesting is even if you say, forget all the research we've done, and Jeff Tompkins has done some fantastic research, but of course, well, it's a creationist, who cares? I'll say, fine, I'll let you have that, because if you read your own literature, you will find a problem. So if you read the human, our billions of DNA letters were sequenced 2001, chimpanzee followed 2005, and those two papers are the big point of contention. In that paper, and let me just pull it up right here, because I have it. I can Google it real fast, pull my computer up, just so people can see it in the paper itself. They'll talk about 1% difference. That's often the number that's thrown around. There's a 1% difference. We're 98 to 99% genetically identical to chimpanzee.
Yeah.
So you hear that number, and emotionally that sounds like, well, we're just kissing cousins. How can that be possible? So let me password protected.
So what are some of the other questions coming up, Maria?
So what are the mechanisms for mitochondrial DNA mutations, and what makes an assumption of constant rates valid?
That's a great question. And
Sin.
so there's two parts of the question. The second part was the constant rate assumption. What was the first part again?
What are the mechanisms for mitochondrial DNA mutations?
Okay, and the mechanism of mutation, I would say, is a black box in general for whether it's mitochondrial or some other genetic compartment. It appears to be perhaps environmentally affected. Otherwise, it just seems to be the molecular machines that are doing the copying, reading the DNA, making another copy for the next generation, occasionally make mistakes. We have an error repair system, which is remarkable. There are actual machines that go in and spot mistakes, repair them, fix them. But you've got 3 billion letters, for example, in our total DNA. Mitochondrial DNA is about 16, 17,000. And it's also the site of heavy chemical activity. And so that's in particular for mitochondrial DNA, because there's so much chemical reactions going on there, reactive oxygen species and so forth. These are some of the ideas, the chemical explanations for why mistakes happen in the first place. But yes, theologically, of course, it goes back to sin.
And things don't operate perfectly anymore.
Exactly.
Things run down.
Exactly.
And so that's why we age and die, actually. The whole reason for death is because of sin. So you were going to show us there.
Here, Bodhi, I have a question for you. From your research, do you know where the Aboriginals came from?
Yeah, the Australian Aborigines. That's a great question. I'm glad somebody brought that one up. When I did the book, I actually did comment on the Aborigines. A lot of the Aborigines, they actually share the same language family, so we can kind of tie the group together. It's not like there was a whole bunch of different groups of Aborigines that made it down there. There had actually been some genetic research done that actually tied them into some of the Hindu Kush, as well as some of the people in Malaysia, the tribe of Seba, as well as some of the people in the lower parts of Africa. Now what's interesting is all those other people groups are descendants specifically of Kush. One of Noah's grandsons. The Hindu Kush, for example, you still see a reflection of the name. Seba, the tribe of Seba, specifically in Malaysia, is actually one of the sons of Kush. So I mean, we kind of see some genetic connections in there as well. So that's kind of a fascinating one as well.
I think I read years ago too that the Australian dingo was very similar to, I think, the Indian wolf or something like that, a dog that they recognised that came down from the north. So that would all fit with that too. But Dr. Jeanson, you're going to show us this article. So this is a secular article, right?
This is the paper people point to when they say humans and chimpanzees are kissing cousins, essentially.
Okay.
2005, Nature, one of the big 3 journals in the globe. So this is the chimpanzee genome sequencing paper. I'm going to zoom down now to the section of the paper where they actually talk about and where this 1% number comes from. So here on the section called genome evolution, nucleotide divergence, so difference basically. They aligned, so best reciprocal nucleotide level alignments of chimpanzee and human. They're aligning human and chimpanzee DNA. 2.4 billion gigabases, that's 2.4 billion letters of DNA, including the sex chromosomes. And here's where they say it. We calculate the genome-wide nucleotide divergence to be 1.23%. So, settled, isn't it? Well, what does this 2.4 gigabases, 2.4 billion represent? You just scroll up a little bit here. The assembly statistics, the total amount of DNA that they had from chimpanzee was 2.7. 2.7, 2.4, who cares? Well, 2.4 divided by 2.7 is 89% of the total sequence. So this 1.23%, see if I can get them both on the same screen, 1.23% difference comes from 2.4, which is only 89% of the total. In other words, we're 1.23% different in 89% of our sequence, and 11% is unaccounted for or unalignable. Why is that significant? Well, you have another website here. This is just an independent organization. They've done alignments of human and chimpanzee with a different algorithm, and they say, you scroll down here, genome coverage, how much of the chimpanzee genome is found in human? 89%. So 2 independent sources giving the same number. So my colleague Jeff Tompkins has done his own independent alignment of these, same number, 89%. 1% different, 11% difference. It still seems close. Well, let's put this now in terms of absolute number of letters. How many letters different is an 11% difference? It's about 300 to 400 million differences.
That's
so this
massive.
this is a gigantic genetic gap between us and the chimpanzee. Furthermore, the evolutionists, this is a 2014 paper in Science, they've measured the rate at which chimpanzee mutates. We already knew there's been a whole bunch of studies on the rate at which humans mutate. Now we know chimpanzees. And it's not what they predicted. So for years, textbooks have been saying humans and chimpanzees split from the fossil record 4 to 6 million years ago. Well, based on the number of genetic differences, even if they say, well, let's just look at 1%. We know the rate at which humans mutate, which chimpanzees mutate. So the difference, 1% difference, human mutation, chimpanzee mutation, this now says they must have split 13 million years ago. So which is it? This is 100% off from what they said originally. So they're not making accurate predictions in genetics from their evolutionary ancestry model. So this model to me is not very successful, and the 1% difference is definitely not accurate. There's hundreds of millions of differences between us and chimpanzees.
And yet school kids are being taught that as fact, and many people out there have this erroneous view, how can the Bible be true? We're 1% different from chimps, which is not true.
Exactly. And in this book, we have probably half of that chapter, if I remember correctly, deals with all the issues that surround that question. We explain what I've just derived there. We talk about something like human chromosome 2 fusion. There's all these other shared mistakes. There's all sorts of other evidences they like to invoke as evidence of common ancestry as inexplicable apart from common ancestry.
It just shows you the general public out there, students in schools and colleges, are just brainwashed. And they're not taught how to think critically about these things.
And I would say, again, we're seeing tables turn, like with what I said earlier about mitochondrial DNA, that, well, creationists don't make testable predictions. Actually, now I'm challenging my evolutionists to make testable predictions. And I'm saying, and if you're really confident in your ability to do it, let's go into the lab and do it and see who's right. Here you have a case, let's say with human chromosome 2 fusion, where they've made a prediction and it turns out to be the opposite. They've made a prediction here and it's wrong. What I was going to get at is the other thing we're often accused of is confirmation bias. Basically, cherry picking data. We start with a predetermined conclusion and then we just select those facts that fit what we've decided already is true and just discard everything else, explain away everything else. What are they going to do in this case? They've established 6 million years ago, here's this fact that doesn't fit it, You just revise it. There's a confirmation bias here.
They're
that's
the
going on
ones
as
that
well.
are cherry picking. They're the ones that are really imposing their view on the evidence, and when it disagrees, they ignore the evidence, right?
I don't think they do it deliberately necessarily. I don't think they even realize the extent to which they're ignoring competing explanations. That's really, to me, what this debate comes down to.
Because they're so convinced of the millions of years.
Or I put it this way: I've had reporters ask me, they'll give me two options. They'll say, "Well, you're obviously disagreeing with 97% of professional scientists, which is what surveys show. 97% reject creation, accept evolution of some sort, whether God directed or not. So what is it? Is the science? Should we throw all that science in the trash, or is there a grand conspiracy?" I say neither of those. It's a really simple, boring explanation. Creation is forbidden in the public school system. Professional scientists get their education in the public school system. They go through all their education never having read a single creationist paper. Science is a method of inductive reasoning. Basically, it's you never prove anything, you just disprove the competition. To disprove something, you have to be aware that it exists. So if you go through your entire education, you're taught there's this hypothesis and varieties of it, and you're not even aware that there's this whole other realm that's making testable predictions, that's confirming explanations in genetics and mitochondrial DNA and nuclear and all these other areas. Well, of course you're never going to realize that you have this confirmation bias while you're doing it. You've never been taught otherwise. So what I tell reporters is it's really simple. They're not aware of the competition. They're forbidden from reading the competition. So of course all they land on is evolution.
They're really indoctrinated.
Yeah.
And they only think in one particular way.
Yeah.
Any other questions, Maria? Yeah.
Yeah, someone said, is it true that you can get all the different skin tones, the different races, from Noah's daughters-in-laws?
Yeah. Is it true we can get all the different skin tones, the so-called races, because they're not races, we're all one race biologically, from those three women going back there? And the answer is yes, it's just genetic variability, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think what many people don't realize and what really clicks is, we've talked about mitochondrial DNA. This is really sort of the exception to the rule. It comes only through mom. Most of our DNA, so I said that's about 16, 17,000 letters, which compared to 3 billion is a tiny fraction. So where does this billion come from? Actually, it's 6 billion. 3 billion from mom, 3 billion from dad. So most of our features are determined from two sources. And so we can explain races really just using genetics 101. It goes back to Gregor Mendel in the late 1800s. He used pea plants. You have yellow-seeded pea plants, green-seeded pea plants. You cross them, all the offspring are yellow. So what happened to green? Was it destroyed? No, it's just hidden because yellow is dominant over green. You intercross these offspring. The next generation, you have green and yellow in predictable mathematical varieties. So the same thing really holds true with skin tone. You can, even if you broke it down into just two genetic varieties, you have two parents giving inputs. At the flood, you have three different couples giving inputs. So you have all sorts of variety, and we know that skin tone is controlled by more than just one particular DNA letter. There's a whole bunch of ones. So you have all these different combinations. Three sets of parents all giving different inputs, and you can see it today. When a dark-skinned African marries a light-skinned Northern European, their children are middle brownish. They have blended features. And if those children would marry children of other sort of mixed ethnic group marriages, you'd see a whole spectrum. So it's very easy with simple genetics.
And it's basically one skin tone anyway.
Yeah.
Melanin is the main pigment, and it's basically a brown pigment. There's no truly, really black people, no truly white people. It's a matter of what shade you are, not what color you are. See, I'm not white. If I was white, I'd look like that, and people would call 911 thinking I had a problem.
Exactly.
So it just comes down to the amount of variability. And that's where people also are easily led astray in regard to speciation, aren't they? Because you can see different species, and they think, wow, that's evolution. Wait a minute, that's just a tiny reflection of the variability that's already there in the dog genes or cat genes and that sort of thing, correct?
Yeah, and classically, we think of species as inability to interbreed. So horses and donkeys are labeled separate species because even though they can produce an offspring, which we have in our petting zoo over there, the zoo here at the Creation Museum, that offspring is sterile. So we'd say there's a reproductive barrier. Well, in humans, there's no reproductive barriers whatsoever. If brother and sister marry, they might not be able to reproduce, but an African can marry a Chinese can marry a Native American, any ethnic group can marry any other ethnic group and have children. So there's the human race is one species. There's no biological basis for saying there should be separate species or somehow there's these weird distinctions. No, these are just varieties that God, now we know from genetics, probably had in the start in Adam and Eve. Again, there's two parents both giving input, and you've got billions of letters. I mean, the mathematical possibilities are incredible.
Yeah, I read one paper where it talked about the number of atoms in the universe is 10 to the 80th power, one followed by 80 zeros. But the number of combinations one man and one woman could have just from their genetic variability is like 10 to the 2017th power.
Yeah.
Which is, you can't even think about it, that number's so big. And there's that sort of variability in the dog kind, the cat kind, the elephant kind, and the evolutionists see the result of that variability, and so it's evolution. It's got nothing to do with evolution.
Yes, and we can, so now that we have human sequences from thousands of people around the globe, on average we're about 0.1% different from one another. So in our billions of letters, about 4 to 5 million, I think I have the number up here somewhere, maybe not on the wall, but about 4 to 5 billion letters, 4 to 5 million letters, so it's a tiny fraction of the billions, 4 to 5 million between me and an African, me and a Chinese, me and a Native American. In Adam and Eve, there were maybe 5 to 10 million, and again, so if there's two different versions of these 5 million, 10 million letters, two different versions at position 1, two different versions at position 500,000, 200 different versions at position 4,500,652. There's massive variety you can have, and it looks like now in the animal kinds, God probably put even more variety. And I can say this because we now have the tiger DNA sequence. We have the house cat DNA sequence, and there's 40 to 50 million differences between them.
And that would explain why you can get these different species in animals. You don't see it in humans because God put in there a greater variability.
Yes, it appears that there were more varieties in animals and plants, in non-humans basically, at the start, whereas humans had less. That's still, millions of differences is a huge number, and you can get a huge number of combinations from that. You can get even more from the animals that were there, which is why you can get 135 bovid species. You can get 37 or so cat species. You can get all this variety you can get hundreds of breeds. That's really what's remarkable. It's something Darwin pointed out too. There's more breeds than species.
And then that's why we have all this information for people in exhibits at the Ark to show that Noah only needed the kinds on the Ark, not the species, not all these breeds and so on, and was far fewer animals than what people realize. So genetics is fun for creationists, isn't it?
Yes, and one of my favorite examples is, let's say, the horse kind or the equid kind. Today you've got 7 living species. You've got 3 different species of zebras, which are distinguishable by their stripe patterns. You've got an African wild ass that got stripes on its legs, which looks remarkably similar to that hybrid that we have out in the zoo at the Creation Museum between a donkey and a zebra. And then you've got 2 wild Asian ash species and a used to be wild horse species. So 7 species. The number of breeds, this is what I like to ask audiences when I'm speaking. How many breeds of horses and donkeys do you think there are? And they'll guess. Well, 50, 100. Over 850 breeds of horses, from Clydesdales to ponies. There's massive variety. And here's what's really the kicker for the evolutionists. We think about the origin of species, the question that's been the basis for this debate for 150 years. Darwin made an argument against the fixity of species using these sorts of data, saying, well, there's all these variety in breeds. Well, why are you saying that species are fixed? We can make we can make more variety in breeds than species. Well, now let's flip the argument around. When did these breeds originate? Forget even the creationist timescale. The evolutionists themselves say hundreds, thousands of breeds. There's thousands of cattle, sheep, and goat breeds, over 3,000. They say all of these arose within 12,000 years or less. So I'm just using their timescale for sake of argument. Then they turn around and say, there's 850 or more breeds of horses and donkeys in 12,000 years. Clydesdales to ponies. Then they turn around and say, but those 7 species, those took 4 million years or so. That can't possibly be true. If you can get this hundreds of varieties in a few thousand years, well then surely these 7 couldn't have taken that long.
That's a really good point. Hey Maria, any other questions? I know people could ask questions. This is fascinating. We could sit here all day, but Dr. Jeanson has to get back to work, and I'm actually going down the Ark, and I'm going to do a live broadcast from the Ark this afternoon at around 3 o'clock. But Maria, any other questions?
Someone asked, how is the data being validated?
How is the data being validated?
So the gold standard of science, I'll use a page from the evolutionary playbook. What's the gold standard of science? What's the difference between science and non-science? It's the ability to make testable predictions. You have a theory of gravity, you have a theory of physics. Well, let's test it to see if the space shuttle blows up. Now, that's an extreme view. Normally, you vet those data beforehand to make sure it's actually going to work and it's going to send a man to outer space and a man to the moon, that sort of thing. That's the gold standard of science, and that's why evolutionists have tried to use that as a club against creationists for decades. Well, how does that advance our understanding of the world? Well, we've just seen. I can predict for you. And let me back up. We've talked about mitochondrial DNA. It's a piece of DNA that helps us metabolize food. Well, thousands, millions of species around the globe metabolize food. They have to take energy from their environment and transform it. They all have mitochondrial DNA. Well, we know the mutation rates from only a handful, less than 10, maybe less than around 5. And I'm saying I can predict, for anyone who's interested, and I'm willing to test this in the lab, I can predict the mutation rate in dogs. I can predict the mutation rate in wolves. I can predict the rate of mitochondrial mutation rate in cats. And any other species on this planet, butterflies. Can the evolutionists do the same? That's the ultimate validation. I think that's the real challenge. So to put it in colloquial terms, they've said, well, you just say God did it. Here's what I think the evolutionists are going to come back to. Well, you're not considering natural selection. I'm going to say, oh, so you're saying natural selection did it. What does natural selection do to help us understand the world? What testable predictions does it make? That's really my challenge to the evolutionist. I think the tables have been completely turned. We have a set of retrodictions. That's what I'm going to call them. We've got the data now, and we can make sense of the past. Well, I can make sense of the future now too. Can evolutionists meet their own standard they've set for us? And not just on some tangential question, on the most important question from their perspective in the biological world, the rate at which mutations happen, the central mechanism of evolution. That's the way to validate it. That's something I'm actively trying to collaborate with some people now on, in going out and doing this now and measuring the mutation rate in mice or in some domestic animal. I think we can do this, and this is a way to validate everything I've just discussed.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
I know there's people asking questions, and we could be here all day, so we'll have to close soon, but let's see what else we got here.
Someone asked, has the Genome Project helped with any of this research?
The Human Genome Project.
Yes, this has been a massive help because let's put it in big picture terms. I'm going to back it up to the origin of species and then bring it back to humans, an example of one of the species. What are species? They're defined by their traits. Zebras by their stripes, their particular pattern of stripes, elephant by its trunk, giraffe by its long neck. Well, those traits are consistent from generation to generation. Put it this way, if a giraffe could birth an elephant birthed something else, we wouldn't even have a concept of species. The fact that species exists is a testament to the fact that it's a fundamentally genetic entity. The only direct scientific record of ancestry is genetics. Well, what's the history of genetics? Gregor Mendel, the start of most genetics textbooks, published his work 1865, 1866, 6 years after Darwin published his first work. We didn't know that DNA was the substance of heredity until 1953, nearly 100 years after Darwin. We didn't have the sequence of our own species until 2001. Basically, we've been arguing about side data, indirect data, for 150 years. Darwin took a massive risk when he tried to answer a fundamentally genetic question 150 years before he had any direct data with which to answer it. So, what has the human genome done for us? Well, this is finally now the first direct scientific record of our ancestry. And when we look at mitochondrial DNA, it fits the young Earth timescale. It fits the structure of the human population genetics at the flood. We look at our billions of letters, and we now have sequences from a couple thousand people around the globe in those billions of letters. It fits God creating differences in Adam and Eve. Well, isn't that arbitrary? No, it makes testable predictions, and I've published these about the rate at which other things should change, and it fits exactly what we see. We didn't even have time to discuss this. So the Human Genome Project has been a huge help, a huge aid, a huge confirmation of what the biblical record says, and the success we've had in the human realm, the best studied species at the genetic level, has then allowed me to then extrapolate to other species and answer the bigger origin of species question that Darwin did and say, here's really the answer. And I'm working on a book that should be out this fall, running titles after Darwin, 3 quiet developments that rewrite the origin of every species, to discuss some of this. So it's really the success in humans that's laid the foundation for going to other species and saying we've completely turned the tables, and this is really now the superior model. It's making sense. It's making testable prediction. It's the evolutionists now are going to have to play defense. We're going on offense and taking the argument to them rather than the other way around.
And you know, when you think about it, I mean, the Human Genome Project, what they're involved in was observational science.
Exactly.
I mean, using your 5 senses in the present to go out and look at the human genome. And that interesting too. One of the conclusions that they actually published was there's only one race.
Exactly.
Only one race of humans. It's a shame some of the politicians don't take notice of the
Exactly.
science from their own scientists. I mean, the man who headed the Human Genome Project, Venter, was an atheist. And yet he was able to, there are a couple of different projects I know, but he was able to then come out and say there's only one human race. Well, that's what that even confirms the Bible. That's what you'd expect, wouldn't you?
Yes.
So only one human race. Any other
There are
main
a
question?
lot of comments.
A lot of comments?
And I'm trying to scroll through, but
Okay, we got lots and lots of comments. People are fascinated by this. I'm sure this is going to be watched by many, many others after we archive it. It'll be archived on my Facebook as soon as we finished here, but we'll also archive it on our YouTube channel for Answers in Genesis.
so can you show me those books again?
Okay, those two books, maybe a quick summary of the Adam book, and I'll get Bodhi to give a quick summary of the Tower of Babel book. So Bodhi, the Tower of Babel book?
Yeah, the Tower of Babel, what we do is we're looking at the different grandsons, great-grandsons of Noah that are listed there in Genesis chapter 10. What people groups came from them, we map that out. I try to do it at a layman level. I'm not going to try to lose too many people with extreme details. But yeah, we just try to map different ones out. We also answer a lot of questions that people have about the tower itself. You know, what did the tower look like? You know, where was it? Those types of questions as well. You know, I've had people ask, well, how did people travel to get to different places? You know, did people walk all the way to America or walk all the way out to England? Or animals, did they arrive at those kind of places by just simply walking? And of course, you know, the Bible talks about a worldwide flood, a global flood, and that triggered all sorts of wild weather and things like that. And one of the things that most creationists believe is that there was an ice age that was triggered by the flood of Noah's day. And with an ice age, you take a lot of water out of the ocean and you put it on land, so your ocean level drops, and that exposes land bridges so that animals and people could actually get to a lot of parts of the world. They could have walked to Japan, walked to England, walked all the way to the Americas, potentially as far as Australia. I know it's a little deeper in Australia, but there's a lot of tectonic activity there too. But you know, we talk about a lot of those things here in the book, Tower of Babel. It is a fascinating resource, so I want to encourage people to pick it up.
And then the brand new book dealing with Adam, and it says Searching for Adam. Dr. Jeanson, you've got a chapter in here, or co-authored a chapter in here, but tell us what this whole book is all about.
This is intended to be a comprehensive, understandable resource on Adam, from the biblical issues to the anatomy and physiology issues to the genetic issues. We've got, again, each chapter is basically a different author with a pastoral type audience in mind. So heavy emphasis on, well, what about this theory of how we should interpret Genesis 1 and 2? Well, what does the image of God mean? And what about this latest resource from John Walton, who says, well, we should reinterpret this? Comprehensive, understandable, thorough resources. I learn a lot from reading these sorts of things. I think it's fantastic. Again, the chapter I've written with Jeff Tompkins, Genetics Confirms the Recent Supernatural Creation of Adam and Eve. We break it basically into 4 parts, revolves around 4 questions. Does genetics say we're primates or people? Was there a population or a pair? Was it millions of years ago or thousands of years ago? Was it Africa or Ararat? And then walk through what the Human Genome Project has shown, what the research we've done has shown, and of course it's ongoing. Again, evolutionists say we don't make testable predictions. Well, I'm testing predictions right now. This says there should be extra biblical historical events. We read off these maps. We're trying to read that off right now.
Right. Well, one of the things we're starting to see in the culture at a seminary level, we're seeing it at certain Christian colleges, certain Christian leaders are saying Adam and Eve didn't exist. And I think this book really addresses that issue that's starting to make waves throughout the church as well.
Yeah, it deals with the theological and scientific aspects of it, doesn't it? And those books can be obtained through the Answers in Genesis online bookstore, answersingenesis.org. Now, I know people have lots of questions. I've got lots of other questions. Maybe I'll ask you one question, just off the wall here. One question you can answer, and then we'll stop right there. And people can go to answersingenesis.org, type in Dr. Nathaniel Jeanson, and get the papers that you've written. They can also type in Bodhi Hodge, Tower of Babel, and get some of that fascinating information. Bodhi's done a lot of research on that as well. So before we finish this broadcast, Dr. Jeanson, okay, I know you've done a little bit of work on zebra. I'm Australian, I should say zebra. Zebra striping. So how can zebras get their stripes? Did that take millions of years?
This is a great question. Actually, that was the original title of the book I was writing, How the Zebra Got Its Stripes. And so the book walks through that I'm writing currently walks through how do we understand the origin of any species, zebras as an example. And it begins with the history of genetics. You've got one of Mendel's fundamental discoveries that there's dominant recessive. When yellow seeds and green seeds cross, yellow's dominant. Well, stripes appear to be dominant. When you cross a horse in a zebra, the horse is still striped. If it was recessive, if it was going to be hidden, it should look like a horse again, but it's striped. So that's the first point. There's dominance and recessive. The second point, a lot of the research I've been doing is looking at the individual genetic differences. We now have the genome sequences, the DNA sequences from all 7 living equid species, the 3 species of horse, the wild ass species, the Przewalski's horse, so forth. And it looks like God created that equid ancestor, which would have been taken on board the ark, with probably about 27 million versions, possibilities, combinations. Probably would have been striped. Again, there was probably a version for striped and no striped. Actually, there's probably multiple places that striping is controlled from a genetic perspective. It's complicated very quickly. So it probably been partially striped, perhaps looking like some of those creatures we have at our zoo. And then after the ark, they would have disembarked, and using some of the principles that the evolutionists themselves have discovered, it's really simple to get new species from that. So first thing you need is bodies, and you can calculate how quickly species can grow. And again, it's explosive, it's exponential growth, it's massive. In 4,000 years, you can get more individuals than Microsoft Excel has the power to calculate. It's just massive. Of course, extinction and stuff limits that, but that's really no question whatsoever. So how do you get a new species? The first step is you got to get genetic variety. Again, using Genetics 101, Gregor Mendel, if you've got 27 million positions where you have 2 different versions.
Well,
and
how many combinations is that?
More than you can calculate.
More than Microsoft Excel.
Yeah. So in one generation, you can get a whole variety. Striped, unstriped, and so forth.
So you could get striped in one generation?
In one generation. And so how do you get that to be a new species? Well, you just then need to isolate these. That was the thing with Gregor Mendel. In his experiments, he as a human intervened. If he would have just let these yellow and green intermix, green would appear and disappear because it's recessive, and yellow would dominate primarily. So to get a green seeded pea plant species, you need to isolate it away from the rest. Same principle holds true with animals. So if you want a striped zebra, or let's say an unstriped one, you need to isolate them away from the rest. Well, you've got a big wide globe after the flood where they start reproducing, they start moving away. They're going to take certain varieties with them, and they're going to have to inbreed with one another. These are, again, standard population genetic principles the evolutionists discovered the early 1900s. And as they repopulate, they then just have a few of these original varieties. The varieties being, come from 2 different parents, and so this is statistics, basically, the evolutionists derive to then get these new species. So it can happen very quickly. Again, we can see the power of this using the analogy that Darwin used, artificial selection. When human breeders pick and choose what they want, this is modeling it. What Darwin didn't know, because he and the whole scientific field was totally ignorant of genetics. What he didn't know is that's an analogy for much more than selection. The processes that I'm invoking, inbreeding, small population statistics, and so forth, that is all also going on in this analogy. So what Darwin used and what Richard Dawkins and others use to this day to try to argue for natural selection is actually one of the most powerful arguments for the mechanism I'm invoking, because there's so much more going on in breeding than just selection.
So does that mean when they came off the ark, they had incredible genetic potential for variability, but it's been diluted in a sense from a layman's perspective? Wouldn't expect as much today, so you wouldn't see as much speciation going on today?
Yes, the rate of speciation per species has declined. There still are, let's say in zebras, maybe about 4 million positions where there's variety, and some of these other ones maybe about 1 million. So there's still potential there. It's a lot less than 27 million, 25 million, but it's present. And there could be new species forming today. And in fact, I think we see it. I'll take mammals as an example. Zebras are a mammal. We're mammals, classified as mammals. We suckle our young and so forth. There's about over 5,400 mammal species today. That's one category of classifications. Humans are a species. There's 3 different zebra species. Well, there's still variety within animals. There's some zebras that lack a mane. There's some that have brown shadow stripes. Those are subspecies. They're distinct. They're just not isolated enough yet to get the separate species label. So there's 5,400 mammal species. There's over 6,000 subspecies. These subspecies, to me, are the precursors to new species. Evolutionists don't realize it, because the rate is just beyond a human lifetime, and they're not looking for it. They're not expecting this. They expect the rate to be every million years or so, not every few decades or
So they're
100 years.
missing it.
So the evidence is right in front of us. We've got all this potential right here. Genetically, breeds and species are very similar. Surprisingly, you'd think after all that inbreeding and the process of producing a Clydesdale or a pony, they would not have any genetic variety. They still do, because we have the genome sequences now of breeds. So there's potential there. We've harnessed that in a massive way to produce, again, over 850 horse and donkey breeds. So there's potential there if something will just migrate away, form a new population. Speciation could be ongoing, and this is something I think people are missing.
Wow. This would be a great video to show in a school class, students, high school
There
students.
are people right now in a class watching
And
it.
there's people in class right now watching it. Well, they're learning a lot from a PhD scientist here, Dr. Nathaniel Jeanson, and also from Bodhi in regard to the Tower of Babel. Well, we could go on for millions of years, but we don't believe in millions of years, so I'm not going to do that. We need to say thanks to Maria for holding that iPhone for I don't know how long. I don't know how your arm is feeling there, but again, if people want to read more about this, so all that information on the zebra and the striping, that's not published yet?
We have, so for when we're talking just humans, this is probably the best resource here. We've got it all
The Adam
summarized
book,
in that
yeah.
book. With respect to the origin of species in general, animals, zebras, so forth. I wrote a series on our website, so again, students don't have to pay anything. You just go to our website, what happened to species after the flood. I assume that the reader knows nothing about what a kind is. I derive that. I go through the breed-species comparison. I go through, in layman terms, the genetics of all this. I link to the technical papers, so if you have someone who is nerdy like me and wants to know the details, you can find that too. But the series I wrote is a summary of all that, 11 parts, even deal with questions, well, why don't more people believe it?
So what's it called?
The Origin of Species After the Flood.
The Origin of Species After the Flood.
So again,
And-
if you just look to me, I haven't written that much for the website, you'll probably find a link there on my page.
Okay, just to do a search on Dr. Nathaniel Jeanson. Also, we do have a separate research journal. If you look at answersandgenesis.org down the bottom, in those menu lists you see there, you'll see Answers Research Journal, or they can just type in Answers Research Journal, and there are many, many papers there from lots of different creation scientists. People really need to get up to speed on some of the cutting-edge creationist research that's been done. The evolutionists don't tell people about it. Many people don't even know it exists because a lot of them in the secular world out there just totally ignore it, don't they? And even in the Christian world, some of the academics we find who reject Adam and Eve and so on, a literal Adam and Eve, they do not even cite some of the research that creationists have done.
And I'll put in one more shameless plug of self-promotion. The book that's really an expanded version of that series, I've written for a non-creationist in mind. I'm writing, assuming the audience knows nothing about creation, doesn't agree with me, and I walk. This is the book after Darwin.
And it'll be published later
in this
year.
fall. In this fall, I've
Okay.
completed the manuscript. It's about 86,000 words with references. I sent it out. It's just gone out to scientific reviewers. Hopefully, we'll get back. I got to get to the publisher June 1. It'll be out this fall. I've written it to be a giveaway to people who say, well, I've written it as a replacement. A man can dream, right? I've written it as a replacement, not just a rebuttal to Darwin's On the Origin of Species, a replacement for On the Origin of Species, not because I think I've written something wonderful, but because I think we've come to a point now where the tables have been completely flipped, and we've got a comprehensive, robust scientific model, makes testable predictions, and it really takes the argument now to our opponents rather than us being on the defensive.
So you're going to become the evolutionist nightmare?
We'll see. I'm hoping it'll promote dialogue. This is obviously an emotive issue.
I know. On my Facebook, and people tell me about my Twitter as well, because there's a lot of people comment there and comment on Facebook. And a lot of the secularists, they just use ad hominem attacks. They just mock. They use blasphemy. They use expletives. But they don't want to listen to the research like this. I think it's almost like they want to have their hands over their ears and over their eyes. I refuse to see, I refuse to hear, which reminds you of Romans 1, where it says those that reject God suppress the truth and unrighteousness. And whether consciously or unconsciously, that's what they're doing, suppressing the truth. So it's great that we can get it out through Answers in Genesis.
One more question.
One more question. Okay, last question.
Because
Okay.
it's been asked a lot. Can we find that diagram out there?
Oh, the diagram. Let's go back out and end with that. Can we find that diagram anywhere, or have you published that anywhere yet, Dr. Jeanson?
Yes, I've got. So this comes straight. This diagram right here with the bar chart basically of the amount of differences was a paper I just published this April, I think, in the Answers Research Journal.
Okay, that's the one that shows that the mutation rates predicted by evolutionists do not match with the mutation rates
Yes.
that are measured, but the ones measured actually match with what creationists predict.
Yeah, and if you want to read the backstory, where I've progressed through the initial 15 papers or so that were published, and then a few new papers that were published in the secular literature. I've got papers prior to this year that I published. That same paper also lists this diagram. It's got the primary references. So all of my technical papers have detailed references.
So
to the
which paper is that?
These come from the same paper in April in the Answers Research Journal.
Okay, and what's it titled? Can you
It's
remember?
got this long mouthful of something like on the origin of human genetic differences.
So they type in Jeanson on
Yeah.
our website, and it'll come up with
Yeah.
all those articles.
Or if you just go to the Answers Research Journal page, linked to from our webpage, you go to this year, or now we're 2017, the 2016 issue. There aren't that many papers published, so you can just scroll through very quickly and see.
the
I've
one
got
by
two.
you.
Yeah.
And what about this diagram here?
I've got a version of this also in that paper.
This is more updated now.
This has more people
data
groups in it.
points.
With 42,000 sequences, you can go on, and you quickly exceed the computing power unless you got special computers to do a lot of these computations. But then you run into software issues. So, but this three-part diagram, you can see again. You'll often see subgroups here, but that's really not a concern. And maybe at one point I admitted earlier. Again, most of these subgroups tend to be regional. This is just Mediterranean. Whereas this node right here, all the people groups that come out it, is global. This right here, this is continent-wide. This is all basically sub-Saharan Africa. This is global, and most importantly, the evolutionists accept this L, M, and N haplogroups. So I'm not even really pointing out something new. I'm just connecting something old to the biblical
And that's in that
biblical model.
paper
Yes.
that was published in 2016 in the Answers Research Journal.
Yes.
If they go there, look at the papers you've published, they'll
Yeah.
see the one that has that diagram in
Yes.
there. Well, that's great. Well, we've had a fun morning. Wow, this turned out to be a lot longer than I thought, but it'd be great for students to watch. I'm sure it'll take up time for a number of classes, and they would learn a lot of information they wouldn't normally hear simply because you're the one that's done the research on this.
Yeah.
And we so appreciate that.
And if they're wondering about fossil sequences, this is one thing I admitted.
See how excited he gets about this? Yeah.
There was a paper published in 2015 talking about mitochondrial DNA clocks in a variety of species, but I talked about the Neanderthal issue. They basically come off here. So from a young Earth perspective, they're either a unique hypermutating group that doesn't change these major conclusions. My guess is it's just degraded DNA. From the evolutionary perspective, there are more differences, so they might say, aha, you've made a wrong prediction. No, that might bump this up to like 300. The evolutionists also said Neanderthals have an even older time scale, that they split from us 500,000 years ago, so this makes the discrepancy even worse.
Even worse.
So
Yeah.
the Neanderthals, bottom line is they don't really change anything that we've just discussed. They make it, if anything, they make it worse for evolution, and they don't change the young Earth element because of the way the unique structure in which they drop out, and that's in a 2015 paper.
Wow, incredible information. Well, thanks, Bodie. Thanks, Dr. Jeanson. We've had a fun morning here. We'll archive this on the Answers in Genesis YouTube channel. It'll also be archived on my Facebook as soon as we stop this broadcast, and it'll get archived immediately. So people can go back and watch it, and I'll go and see our social media team right now and get them to archive it for everyone on the Answers in Genesis YouTube channel. So thanks for spending time with us this
Thank
morning,
you.
and look forward to that book coming out in the fall, and to continuing research here, and hope there's some evolutionists out there that'll contact you and say, we'll take you up on your challenge, and let's work together and see what we can do. You would do that, right?
In science, science would advance. This is the way it's supposed to work. You make a testable prediction, and you go into lab and see if it works.
So if an evolutionist says, okay, I want to work with you on this, you do that.
Let's do it.
Okay, excellent. All right. We'll end this broadcast here from Answers in Genesis.